I'll probably change my mind 10 times before the season starts, but for now, I'm going to rank Bijan Robinson ahead of Saquon Barkley. And the main reason is I'm going to be making this rankings and tier list for a full PPR format where I think the Bijan Robinson receiving usage is just going to be safer than what you're going to get with Barkley. And I think we could see some negative regression when it comes to Saquon Barkley's big plays in comparison to Bijan, where he had no explosive plays last year. So, of course, Barkley, he outscored Bijan Robinson last season. You had Barkley at 22.2 points per game, Bijan at 20.1, and then the other running back in this tier, Jahmyr Gibbs, at 21.3. But if we're looking at Barkley, this was a running back that was drafted way earlier than Bijan Robinson, that is now just eclipsing the age peak that we've historically seen for the running back position. I think that we could possibly see the Philadelphia Eagles have to play some closer games this year, and we actually see the passing rate in this offense take a step forward, the rushing rate going down. And with Bijan Robinson, if you have any upside for Michael Penix to increase the amount of trips that his team takes to the red zone, I think you can possibly jump off to the younger ascending running back in full PPR formats. Now, if you're playing in a non-PPR league, or if you're playing in a half PPR underdog best ball draft, there I probably still prefer Barkley, but it is going to be relatively close. And you will see Gibbs actually was very close to Barkley's points per game last year in full PPR. The reason I'm going to have Gibbs at the bottom of this tier, however, is the offensive line should be worse with the center retiring. And you have the offensive coordinator now leaving this team. So you do have some uncertainty for Jahmyr Gibbs, where I don't feel like you have that same thing with Barkley, Bijan. But no matter what, all three of these running backs, great choices. If I could take any one of these players inside the top 6 picks in the Flock League or in an underdog draft, I'd be super happy to do so. Now, going over and looking at tier 2, I have moved McCaffrey up since the last time you saw this list. McCaffrey is now going to be my running back 4. I actually am taking him as early as the 107 in underdog best ball tournaments where we're shooting for the highest ceiling possible. If it was my regular redraft league, I'd be very scared to do that. It would be terrifying. But if we just average out the points per game that we've had for all these running backs over the past 2 years, looking at the 2023 and 2024 seasons, Saquon Barkley, despite just giving you nothing in the games that he was injured in last year, he would still be the running back 1 over the past 2 years with 22 points per game, almost 120 total yards per contest. And what's very funny is if we're going to look at Achane versus Derrick Henry over the past 2 seasons averaged out, Devon Achane, including his rookie season and including in games where Tua was injured, actually has a higher points per game mark than what you've seen with Derrick Henry at 17.5 in comparison to 17.2. Now, of course, one of these seasons for Henry, he was in Tennessee. That's why we actually had a very good call to fade Derrick Henry back in 2023. Did not work so much in 2024. But I think the Achane receiving volume is going to go through the roof now that this team has no Jonnu Smith. You're already at about 4.5 targets per game over the past 2 years. If you get a healthy Tua, no Jonnu, I think you can see Achane go up to 5-6 targets a game, very easily eclipse 20 fantasy points per game. Whereas Derrick Henry, on the other hand, from a full PPR perspective, over the past 2 seasons, he's averaged 1.7 targets per game. We know the receiving involvement is going to go to Justice Hill, and I'm obviously going to be putting a slight discount on Derrick Henry given the age. And then Ginty, we can't use the player comparison for him. We just have no NFL stats yet for Ginty, but we can confidently project him to come in and immediately see 300 touches in his rookie season in the Raiders offense. Issue is the Raiders offense is probably going to be worse than the Niners, than the Dolphins, than the Ravens. But the receiving usage should be there. The red zone role should be there. Elite running back prospect. I have no issue at all grabbing him at the 1-2 turn. Now, going down to tier 3, we can actually do something that's really cool with the player comparison tool here. And if you don't know, the player comparison tool that we're looking at the moment, it's on flockfantasy.com. It just dropped last week. It's completely free if you wanted to check it out. But what you can do with this tool is where you're looking at the time frame, you can actually pull in different time frames by player. And that's going to be extremely relevant when we're looking at names like Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor. Because when it comes to Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, these older veteran running backs that we're not necessarily expecting them to continue on an upwards trajectory, I like averaging out the past 2 seasons. That way we have a slightly larger sample. Whereas with Bucky Irving, a rookie, whereas if we're looking at Chase Brown, a running back that really didn't get involved until week 9 last year, I'm actually going to be narrowing down the weeks that we're looking at for 2024, weeks 9 through 17. And that's going to be extremely relevant because if we look at Chase Brown in weeks 9 through 17, this is when you had no Zach Moss, and Chase Brown was playing 80+% of the snaps every single week. And what did he do during this stretch? 20.6 fantasy points per game, which clears every other running back that he's getting drafted around. 116 total yards per game. You have the red zone involvement with 1.25 carries per game inside the 5-yard line. You have the receiving involvement with 5.5 targets per contest as well. So Chase Brown looks like an absolute crusher. You're getting him in round 3 of underdog drafts at the moment. I'm for sure going to continue with that. I'm looking at Bucky Irving, breaks out in the second half of the season. The volume numbers, not great. Like, you only had 14 rushing attempts per game. You also only had 3.13 targets per game. But, I mean, this is what you typically see with those rookie running backs, right? You're not going to see that massive volume unless you are a Leonard Fournette, unless you are Ashton Genty, unless you are Ezekiel Elliott, unless you're that top 5 to top 10 NFL draft pick as a rookie. But if you provide efficiency off of a limited amount of volume, we should expect that you see more touches in your second season, which is exactly what happened with Achane last year. Jacobs, the Packers were extremely run heavy last season. I think that they actually may skew a little more pass happy this year, but you still have the receiving involvement for Jacobs anyway, where he had 3.23 targets per game last year. So it should be a safe bet regardless. And Jonathan Taylor, I was actually fading in underdog drafts at the end of the second round earlier this offseason, but that was back when it looked like you were going to have Anthony Richardson as the starter, or at least that's what I thought. But with the Anthony Richardson shoulder injury and things leaning in the direction of Daniel Jones, I actually think that Daniel Jones would be a much better quarterback for Taylor to have fantasy production. So I'm actually going to start targeting Jonathan Taylor in this tier, where Taylor over the past 2 years has averaged over 100 total yards per game. Now, if you wanted to draft any of these running backs, they're all going at the 2-3 turn in underdog drafts right now. Again, I was fading Jonathan Taylor and taking Chase Brown in the third round in the majority of them. And I'll still probably continue to take Chase Brown. I just don't want to be fading any of these running backs. But if you wanted to draft them, you can do so on Underdog Fantasy literally today. All summer long, we've been doing best ball drafts in the live stream every single night. Again, best ball, no time commitment at all during the season, so not going to replace your main fantasy football league. And if you wanted to draft with us in the stream or just by yourself when you're on the toilet, you can find a link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy and make a $10 deposit, you will get all our 2025 rankings. You'll get all our 2025 draft guide cheat sheets, plus you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. So make sure you take advantage of that. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Breece Hall, Kyren Williams, as well as James Cook. Let's get the rookie out of the way with Amari Hampton. I think he could be a top 5 running back in the final 3 weeks where all the money's won in the playoffs. If you are looking at the prospect profile, he has the size to be a bell cow. We had the bell cow level volume in college. He was a great receiving back. He has a phenomenal athletic profile demonstrated at the NFL Combine. Plus, he gets round 1 NFL draft capital. He goes to a team with a good offensive line, a good quarterback, a good coaching staff that wants to run the ball. Amari Hampton literally checks every single box. Now, of course, early in the season, Najee Harris is going to have a role. And I don't want to say in my week 1 rankings, I'm going to have Amari Hampton as a must-start player. So maybe it's awkward in round 4 taking Amari Hampton if you don't think you're going to start him week 1 with Najee Harris there. But again, if I was just making rankings for the second half of the season, I think you could justify Amari Hampton as a top 24 pick in your draft. So absolutely love Hampton and not wanting to fade him. If we're looking at Breece, Kyren, James Cook, it is crazy for Kyren to be ranked down here at 13, where if we're looking at the past 2 years for every single one of these running backs, Kyren Williams has finished as the RB4 over the past 2 seasons with 18.8 fantasy points per game and over 100 total yards per game. Now, the thing with Kyren is they invested into Blake Corum last offseason, and Corum turned out to be nothing. This year, they invested into Jarquez Hunter, and Hunter specifically is going to get used as a receiver, which is the main concern. because Kyren Williams over the past 2 years has averaged 3.14 targets per game. But with that, he's only given you 13.5 receiving yards per game. So it's very reasonable to expect that maybe the Rams want to see the rushing go to Kyren and the receiving role go to a different back in this backfield, maybe a little closer to the Derrick Henry, Justice Hill type split. Now, if you think that Kyren Williams continues to see 80+% of the snaps every single season, if you think he continues to have 100 total yards per game, obviously you'd put Kyren Williams in the tier above this, maybe even 2 tiers above. Breece Hall, the receiving involvement's been great, over 5 targets a game over the past 2 years. It's actually crazy as you've only had 13 rushing attempts per game over the past 2 seasons. So Breece, a little more exciting in full PPR formats. Typically, those rushing quarterbacks aren't going to have a high checkdown rate. However, Justin Fields actually has through his NFL career. It will be interesting to see if that carries over. And then obviously with James Cook, it's just been 2 polar opposites over the past 2 seasons. Now, everything from the rushing attempts, the rushing yards per game, all that looks identical, but the polar opposites are the rushing touchdowns. You had no rushing touchdowns at all through the first 2 years of his NFL career, and then he was at the very top of the NFL this past season. What I'd be slightly concerned about with James Cook is not Ray Davis stealing all his rushing touchdowns. It's not Josh Allen's going to have 30 rushing touchdowns this year. That's not my concern. My concern with Cook is what happens if the Buffalo Bills feel like they can actually ask Josh Allen to drop back a little bit more when they get in the red zone this year. And if we see the Bills not be a leading team in the NFL with rushing touchdowns by a country mile, and instead they're throwing the ball a little bit more inside the 5, inside the 10, I think you could just naturally have the touchdowns come down from Cook's perspective. Now, going over to a very, very large tier. First, let's talk about the rookies. I'm going to take Trevion Henderson over RJ Harvey. I know Harvey's arguably in a better situation, but now that you have Dobbins in Denver, I personally want to say that I don't think Ramondre Stevenson is that much better of a running back than J.K. Dobbins is. Now, maybe I'm just burned from having Ramondre in the Flock League last year, but regardless, I think both running backs with Harvey and Henderson are just set to have receiving roles quickly and at the same time can increase their overall touches in their respective offenses as the season goes forward. For me personally, and I think a lot of other people felt the same way, I think Trevion Henderson was a much better running back coming out of school and a much better prospect than RJ Harvey is. And at the same time, I would expect the Patriots to have a better offensive line than they did last year, and I would expect the Patriots to have better quarterback play. But RJ Harvey going to be in a good situation as well. Now, looking at the veterans in this tier, if we are just pulling them all up in the player comparison tool, just to make sure you can look at the time frame. Remember, I told you that with that player comparison tool on the site, not only can you change the time frame, but you can also change all the stats that you're looking at. There are way more stats that you can pull on the site for completely free that aren't just the ones that are showed on your screen right now. So go check that out whenever you want. But for the time frames that we're looking at for all these running backs and why I decided to pick them, Kenneth Walker, feel like the situation in 2023 and 2024 wasn't that different. And again, if I can take a larger sample, I'm always going to. So we're looking at Kenneth Walker over the past 2 years. We're looking at Chuba Hubbard just in 2024 and 2023. I don't think the role is representative of what we should expect in 2025. We're looking at Alvin Kamara over the past 2 years. Don't think his situation changed too much for that to be a massive thing. Joe Mixon here, I think you could split it between Cincinnati and Houston. But in reality, his role in the respective offenses weren't too different. So I'm just going to pull the past 2 years for Joe Mixon. And then James Conner, 2023, 2024 is about the same. So we're just looking at 2 years there. So everybody we're looking at the past 2 years for except Chuba Hubbard. If we're looking at the best running back by country mile here from a points per game perspective, it's Alvin Kamara. Now, of course, that's only in a full PPR format. If you're drafting on Underdog and half PPR league, you're not nearly as excited about Kamara here. Kamara, 15.11 rushing attempts per game, which is actually the second lowest mark on this list, only ahead of Kenneth Walker. Total yards up at 98, but Kamara drafted in 2017, Joe Mixon drafted in 2017, James Conner drafted in 2017. Kenneth Walker is younger, ascending, and at the same time has the pedigree. So I'm just going to give the benefit of the doubt to Kenneth Walker, to be completely honest. And the Seahawks did invest into the offensive line this offseason. Not saying it's going to be a good offensive line, but they at least tried some things. I'm looking at Chuba Hubbard, absolutely dominated last year, 16.1 points per game. However, my concern that I'm maybe going to have with Chuba Hubbard is they go through and they sign Rico Dowdle. They don't stop there. They also draft Trevor Etienne with decent draft capital at the top of the 4th round. Again, Alvin Kamara, old running back that has lost steam. If you're looking at the game logs on flockfantasy.com, which you can pull these up for free as well, just click the player on the rankings page. It'll drop everything down for you. You have all the advanced analytics there as well. But if you're looking at the second half of the year for Kamara, both in 2023 and 2024, he has really slowed down, which is a massive concern if you're pairing Kamara up with maybe another running back that should get better as time goes on, like with Trevion Henderson. It could be interesting if you get the points from Kamara early in the season and the points from Henderson late in the year, or if you think your league mates are going to be trade happy and you can go through and have Alvin Kamara as a low-end RB1 through the first month of the season and then trade him away before he loses juice, or at least that's what we've seen over the past 2 years. That could be interesting. Joe Mixon, I'm concerned that they draft Woody Marks, who very clearly can be the third down back for this team. And Joe Mixon, where he's averaged about 3.7 targets per game over the past 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that falls. And they have Nick Chubb, who I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up just stealing a couple touchdowns. And then looking at James Conner. Conner had the best year of his NFL career last year from a health perspective. However, we've already had reports this offseason that he's dealing with nagging injuries. And at the same time, if we take a step backwards and look at Conner through his entire NFL career, we've always seen Conner dealing with these nagging injuries that keep him out a week, keep him out 2 weeks, keep him out 3 weeks. You have Trey Benson going into year 2 as well, who I'd expect to have a slightly larger role. So I'm honestly just overall short on Conner this season. But again, 93 total yards per game over the past 2 years has looked very good. Now, going down to our next tier, let's first look at the rookies with Quinshon Judkins as well as Caleb Williams. With Judkins, I think is a phenomenal prospect, elite level athlete, gets solid draft capital inside the top 40 picks in a very strong running back draft class. Now, of course, the receiving involvement wasn't phenomenal at Ohio State, but again, he had a split with Trevion Henderson. If you go back to his 18-year-old season before he transferred, he actually was immediately used as a receiver. So I think Judkins is a phenomenal running back. The issue is very similar to Kamara. It's just like, okay, well, you're in the worst offense in the NFL. I'm going over and looking at what we have specifically with Caleb Johnson. I'm definitely more excited about Caleb Johnson now that you have Aaron Rodgers under center in comparison to where we were at with Mason Rudolph. I would just expect that you have more trips to the red zone and what should be a rush first Arthur Smith offense. And then looking at the veterans, by far and away the best running back in this range over the past 2 years has been David Montgomery. But again, with Montgomery, another year older, not only are you another year older, but at the same time, you have the younger ascending running back with Jahmyr Gibbs in your same offense, which I wouldn't be surprised at all if Gibbs takes another step forward. Plus, you have offensive line downgrades, plus the change with the offensive coordinator. So overall, I'm going to be concerned about Montgomery there. Looking at DeAndre Swift, last season, he averaged about 12.6 fantasy points per game. But since then, the Chicago Bears have made significant investments into their offensive line. And we should expect that this overall offense is much better anyway with the improvement of Caleb Williams going into year 2 and the new coaching staff. With Isaiah Pacheco averaging out his points over the past 2 years, 12.9, not necessarily the best. The receiving involvement's been fine. The issue is, funny enough, is just Pacheco has not scored touchdowns in what historically should be thought of as a very high-scoring Chiefs offense. Looking at the other running backs here, Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones on paper is set up for a great 2025 season. You have him over the past 2 years averaging about 13.4 fantasy points per game, up at 87 total yards per contest. They make significant investments into the offensive line. You have great weapons. You have a promising quarterback with one of the best coaching staffs in the NFL. But Aaron Jones now pushing 30. They go through and they bring in Jordan Mason. So again, I personally, and we have the data to bring this up. I mean, we'll just show this on the screen pretty much every time we talk about one of these older running backs. But we can actually see with the range of outcomes of these guys that I know maybe I need to make a dedicated video for this because everybody looks at Derrick Henry and what he did last year and they ignore all the other running backs that have been washed out, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, et cetera, et cetera. But once you hit 29, once you hit 30, the expectations for these running backs should naturally be they start to slide. Like looking at Pollard and Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson, 12.3 points per game over the past 2 years. has been much worse, but I'm willing to put him in the same tier because if I had to bet on a running back getting better, it would be a running back like Brian Robinson as competing against Austin Eckler, who again, in that 2017 class, another year older. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually get Brian Robinson with slightly more targets in what should be a better offense, and he should be viewed as the ascending running back, in my opinion. Now, going over and looking at our next tier, we have a super, super long list of guys. Starting with Travis Etienne, the very interesting note with Etienne is he fell down to an 18% juke rate this past year. I know a lot of people are looking at Etienne's season in terms of pre-injury and post-injury. And yes, the efficiency fell off dramatically in the second half of the season. And that's where Travis Etienne was pretty much unusable. I mean, he's unusable all year, realistically. 14.8 fantasy points per game as his best mark in full PPR contest. The coaching staff's been talking him up a bit, but at the same time, realistically, they could be trying to trade him. They drafted Tootin in round 4. It's a new coaching staff that has no investment into Travis Etienne. Tyron Tracy had a fine rookie year. The issue is, one, Tyron Tracy was like the oldest rookie you could ever imagine. 2, I think Cam Scadaboo is a better prospect. 3, at the same time, you actually do have Tracy with fumbling concerns. Jalen Warren, I think, can give you some usable weeks at the beginning of the season. Jalen Warren was RB 41 in points per game last year, though. Like, realistically, I know a lot of people love Jalen Warren, but I think you may be viewing a running back that is startable if you're desperate and you're really just like an elite handcuff. I could almost say the same thing with Jordan Mason. I think Mason will have a role alongside Aaron Jones. I just don't know if you're going to start this dude outside of an injury to the lead back. Cam Scadaboo, maybe he can take over as the starting running back by the time we get to the end of the season. My take with the Giants running backs in general is I don't know who the starting running back's going to be come week 12. So what I've been doing in my drafts is I've been taking the cheaper guy. So right now with all the teams I've drafted on Underdog, I am underweight Cam Scadaboo, overweight Tyrone Tracy. And the reason for this is if you go back a month, you had Scadaboo getting drafted a round ahead of Tracy, and I preferred Tracy, so I was just taking him. Now, if you look at how drafts are today, Tracy goes well ahead of Scadaboo. So I've actually been drafting a lot of Cam Scadaboo, has the size, had the receiving skill set in college as well. Zach Charbonnet, you could start him if you're absolutely desperate, but in reality, he's just kind of a handcuff, a guy that if you were to have an injury to Kenneth Walker, he explodes. Javonte Williams could potentially be the starting running back in Dallas, but obviously you don't have any guarantee there whatsoever. Right now, reports are Miles Sanders is currently running with the ones. Najee Harris would be the last running back in this tier. Again, Najee is like, you can start him if you're desperate, but in reality, he's more like an elite handcuff if anything were to occur to Amari and Hampton. Going down to tier 8, this is a group of players that we want to say they could have a ton of upside if their backfields were to shake out in a certain way, but we just don't know. Like, I am pretty damn confident that Amari and Hampton going down would mean Najee Harris is a must-start running back in my rankings that week. I am pretty damn confident Aaron Jones going down means Jordan Mason is a must-start running back in my rankings that week. By Shell Tootin, I can't tell you that, because if Travis Etienne goes down or if Tootin's just the starting running back straight up, realistically, it's probably going to be a backfield split. I mean, hell, you could have Tank Bigsby coming in, getting short yardage work, getting the rushing touchdowns, and Tootin's just like the third down back with a little more juice. J.K. Dobbins, I can say, you probably have some upside if you were to get an injury to R.J. Harvey. Maybe you could start him if you were absolutely desperate, but if he doesn't have the receiving role and he just simply didn't have the juice in the second half of the year, not his fault. His career was obviously derailed by injuries. Ramondre Stevenson, I just don't see what the upside case is with Stevenson, because realistically, we saw Stevenson with no Trevion Henderson last year. He finishes with 11.73 fantasy points per game. Like, the receiving volume comes down dramatically, 2.7 targets per game. He had a 9% team target share last year. So if Trevion Henderson's healthy, he's not going to be startable. For that reason, I honestly may need to flip Tajee Spears and Ramondre. Like, I've drafted a lot more Spears. I've drafted a lot more Trey Benson than Ramondre Stevenson. Like, I honestly think I would rather take them than Stevenson just because I think they have more juice. And also, I would much rather compete against Tony Pollard and James Conner than I would Trevion Henderson, to be honest. And then our last running back in this tier is Rachaad White. For underdog draft specifically, I think Rachaad White's like the best pick ever because I wouldn't expect Bucky to come in and have 80+% of the snaps in this offense. So if you do get Rachaad White with 30 to 40% of the backfield work when Bucky's healthy, I think at best ball, he could give you a couple random usable weeks. But obviously, if I draft him in the flock league, I'm never starting this dude outside of the case that you do get a Bucky injury. And then tier 9 and below is like, maybe if the starter were to go down, you can start him. Maybe if James Cook were to go down, Ray Davis is somebody you can put in. Now, he was that singular week this past year, of course, where when he played 62% of the snaps with no James Cook, he scored 18.2 fantasy points, but that's not necessarily guaranteed to be the case again this next year. Jaden Blue may be the running back 3 on this team behind both Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams. We have no idea. Tank Bigsby may be the running back 3 on this team behind Travis Etienne and Byshell Tootin. Tyler Algier, we saw a high ceiling from back at the end of 2022 when you had no Bijan Robinson, where he was at 22, 15, 16, 13 and a half fantasy points in the final month. But it's been a long time since then. Bijan's played back-to-back seasons of 17 games, so I don't think Algier's like a guaranteed must-start player. If Bijan were to go down, I'd probably rank him highly. It'd probably be my top 24 that week, but I wouldn't rank him as high as I would Charbonnet if Kenneth Walker were to go down. Braylon Allen, I'd probably have as a borderline top 24 running back if Breece Hall were to go down in my rankings that week. But again, I just can't guarantee that to be the case. Like, we've never seen Braylon Allen. I guess actually we've had one game where he played 54% of the snaps and he finished with 12 fantasy points that week. And then Isaac Guerendo, again, CMC goes down. I can't guarantee that he's the starting back. Like, if you told me Mason for 100% certainty, if McCaffrey gets injured, Isaac Guerendo steps into the Jordan Mason role from last year. And he is that number 2. Then in reality, Isaac Guerendo would shoot all the way up to minimum RB39 in my rankings. But hell, it could be Jordan James. I have no idea who could be in San Fran. But hopefully I was able to help you out in some way with these rankings. A couple different things. One, if you wanted to check out that player comparison tool, it's completely free over there on the site. Just type in flockfantasy.com, go to the player comparison, all the stats that we have, all the advanced stuff, carries inside the 5-yard line, yards per route run, target share in their offense, targets per route run, whatever the hell you want to look at. It's all for free out there for you. And of course, I would love to draft with you. If you're not drafting right now, I'd maybe look to fix that. Because again, best ball drafts aren't going to take away from your main fantasy football league. Just some extra fun. Also can get you prepped for your main fantasy football draft, which we are drafting on Underdog Fantasy. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well as the comment section. And again, if you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog, you'll get all of my 2025 rankings and draft guide cheat sheets. Plus, at the same time, you will also be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. But that's all I got for you. Really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.